So we're going to change the order a little bit. We're going to give Chief Voisin an opportunity to present tonight because I think the schedule is a bit full the rest of the week. And then we'll take a look at transit after that. So fire is up next. I'd just like to highlight that Councillor Elaine McDonald had an errand to run. She will be back. Councillor DePel had another work engagement, so he may not be back. Chief Voisin.
So where are we, Chief?
Good evening.
We on, Chief?
Let's start at C78. I'll give everyone a chance to find that page, and while I have a minute while you do that, I'm going to use the opportunity for a shameless plug and give kudos to not only our firefighters who worked all night at a fire at -27, but also other city staff who helped and supported. I got a ton of comments from our folks that they got a bunch of help, including salt on a much-needed roadway while we're playing with water in the -30. So it was really a team effort last night, and really appreciative of all the work. I was out on South Branch Road.
Jeez, that's a stretch.
So there's no hydrants there. So we also got the help of our neighbors providing water supply to us throughout the night. So it was a fantastic effort by all.
Well, kudos to you for being there all night.
Thank you for highlighting that. It's appreciated.
So if we're ready to go, the Fire Services has two capital projects that I'd like to talk about tonight. The first being our fire headquarters and training center. Councilor McDonald, we're at C78, if you're looking for that page. So our current building is almost 50 years old. And a bit of a funny story, we have firefighters that were hired and told that they were lucky that they were coming in at that time because they get the benefit of a new building. Those firefighters are retiring this year and next year. So the city has been talking about a new fire station for many, many years for many reasons. And I believe initially back then was mostly because of the issue of municipal coverage and response times. As I'm sure you're aware, and I've presented here before, one of the issues that we have with the current makeup of the two-station model is we have some overlap in the middle. So we have a bit of a saturation of response capability where we get there too quickly and we don't cover the rest of the city appropriately, which is why the northwest area was identified as possibly the next preferred area for the station. So based on that, and dovetailing with the fact that at 50 years old, this building has reached its end of life as identified in the asset management plan, and further identified in the in the long-term financial plan, now is the time to start looking at that project, in my estimation. So maybe just to clarify why the change in priorities or timelines with regards to the long-term financial plan, I believe in the plan we identified a 2020 expenditure of $5 million for the fire station. So a couple reasons. So number one, in 2017, council gave us the go-ahead to hire a company to start doing the evaluation and the selection of site as well. Basic concept. We're still working on that. That will be coming to council this year. So essentially, we're ready to start this year. So it's also not necessarily practical to expect that we would fund, plan, build, and move into a building in 1 year. So the 2020 concept in the financial plan isn't all that practical. So essentially, what we're doing is we're gonna spread the project out over 3 years. So we would look at beginning with the purchase of the location, some site preparation and design work in the first year, and consequently finishing the project in 2020 and 2021. The other reason that this building is required is we really do not have a viable training area. We've been using some space in the western part of the city on Saunders. It's a makeshift it's a makeshift temporary location, but we would certainly benefit from having a training capacity on the location of our headquarters, which would be appropriately located in the city. So as I mentioned, Collier's project management or project leaders were engaged to do this work on the station location and the basic footprint requirements of the project. And Councillor Towndale, to answer your earlier question, that's essentially what led to the change in the overall estimates of the building. So at the time of the financial plan, we worked with the consultants at the time. We came up with call it a placeholder, an amount that we would estimate the building to be at. But now that we've done a majority of the work, we have a much better idea in terms of a Class D estimate for the land, the site prep, the building, and all of the, it's quite a complicated process. But as we're moving forward, we're starting to get more clarity on the values associated with this project, and that's what's essentially presented in the budget this year. So just to end this conversation, essentially, we have an amount that we're presenting in the budget this year. However, the report from the project of the selection of the land and all associated work there will be forthcoming to council in the next few months. And then, as it would for any other project, all of the steps in between there would obviously come to council as we move forward. So this is a budgetary effort as well. So the last piece is this.
Let me interrupt. Councillor Towndale?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Chief. A couple questions for you on this. So the first one, in regards to the training center, would you also look at the possibility of trying to attract other departments to come here and train, obviously at a cost to them?
Excellent question, absolutely. We've already started doing a little bit of that, but without an appropriate facility, it's difficult to do. So yes, I think as the call it big brother, big sister of the area, we could certainly play a big role in providing training to other fire departments, especially in light of the provincial push to certification for firefighters.
Okay, thank you. Second question has to do with response times and whatnot, because this is the Appendix D, which has the road extensions we talked about. We're just undertaking the study to look at 9th Street extension potentially this year, and that could be a long time away. So that factors into the drive times on this appendix. So, like for example, right now it shows like North Riverdale's in the green, but without that road, that wouldn't be green. So, do you feel that moving the station would affect response times to the west end of town from the current station? Like, do you feel that there's an impact there?
Well, I think, so the reason we approached it that way is because we also didn't want necessarily to discount a possible 3-station model in the future. So growth essentially drives the requirement for that. And if we start seeing movement in that north, maybe north-south quadrant, then perhaps the council will want to have a conversation about a 3rd-station model then. And I would argue that the overlap situation really takes away from our response times to other part of the city. So by moving headquarters to that corner, you're making your response times better generally in accordance to the number of buildings in the city, and you're not impacting whether or not there's growth in a particular other quadrant of the city, where we could generally look at the addition of a 3rd station at that time.
Okay. Sorry, Madam Mayor, through just one quick follow-up. So then the end goal would be to vacate the building next door?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gardner?
You've mentioned training, so would the communities that send their firefighters in for training be paying the shot for the training?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's varying models around the provinces where fire departments are providing training at a cost to local municipalities, and we could certainly play a role in that.
Funding
there. And there's a need for it. Yeah. There is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Grant?
I was at your public consultation, and there were 3 areas. So you've finalized the selection of the.
So the report that will come to council will make some recommendations, and yes, there will be 3 different areas that are recommended for varying reasons.
Councillor Hébert?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Correct me if I'm wrong, I might be wrong. happens often. Is there not enough capacity for women next door? Like, I think it was mentioned a year or so ago when this conversation began, was that there's no change rooms or bathrooms for women, so the recruitment of women on the force is difficult if we can't accommodate them.
So that is accurate. Currently, the building isn't necessarily equipped, but I wouldn't go as so far as to say that that's what's prevented us from hiring women up until now. There will be changes to that forthcoming, and I mean, we will modify the current building, even if it is for a few years, to accommodate. Absolutely. There's just never been, the need hasn't arisen for us to do that.
And this new facility would, of course, have all of those facilities available within, from the get-go, regardless
100%.
of the gender parity or lack thereof.
Of course,
Okay.
absolutely.
Great, thank you.
If a woman firefighter were hired this year, though, she would be accommodated in the current building.
Of course.
Excellent.
Thank you. Okay.
Uh,
Councillor Bergeron?
I have a question about the business plan, and I know we had spoken earlier. Can you give a little more detail on when that's coming, and also how you can know what we need to budget if the business plan isn't completed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So essentially, the majority of the work in the report has been done. So the Class D estimates and that work has been done. There's a few little clarity points that we want to work on before we bring it to council to make sure that it's a perfect report. So that's why, I mean, we did the work on the financial part in preparation for the budget so that we don't skip a year and put ourselves in a situation where we have to push the whole project back again.
So my next question, if I
Go
may, I
ahead.
think it's for the CFO, but if we're being asked to put aside $2.9 million, but it also says financing, why would we finance a project if it's only being built in 2021 or 20?
Madam CFO?
Through you, Madam Mayor. It's a very good question. Like the chief said, what we'd like to do is get the project on the books, get it approved by council. There's actually no financing dollars in the 2019 budget because we won't incur those costs in 19. So it will affect, though, the 2020, 21, 22 budget once we move forward with purchasing of land, construction, et cetera.
And that explains why the long-term financial plan was changed to reduce
Yes.
reduction, or it adds that, but reduce the other items.
Correct.
So in essence then, if I may, we're approving the idea of 8.7 million, not 2.9 million for this year. It's for the entirety of the project.
That's right. What we do is we ask council's approval for the project, because if we approve, if council would just approve or we'd bring forward just 2.9, what would we do in year 2, 3, or 4? Would that project be pushed if we couldn't get approval from council in future years? So it's always for the cost of the total project, unless we decide to save money by contributing to reserves each year.
But we're not doing that in this case.
No, we wouldn't have source funding to contribute to reserves. It's coming from financing, which is not part of this budget.
I'll give it a little bit of thought. I think I have a few follow-up questions on this. I'll let it be for right now, if that's okay.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead, Chief Wazin.
The second project is the replacement of our rescue boat. In accordance with the establishing and regulating bylaw, we provide shore-based and water-based rescue services on the river. We have done so for a number of years. We've been operating with a smaller boat that is essentially partially inflatable, and it's in the last couple of years has created some issues for us and incurred some costs and maintenance headaches. We haven't brought this forward earlier simply because we were trying to get on providing a more holistic service in accordance with other groups within the country that provide service, namely the Canadian Coast Guard. So essentially, if there's rescue operations that occur on the St. Lawrence River here, they essentially usually get involved. But what we've learned in meetings with them is we're responding to events on the river that they're not aware about, and they're responding to events along the river that we're not aware about. So best that we start talking and working together. So the project essentially here is they have a minimum standard in terms of providing or recognizing primary search and rescue efforts, and what we're proposing is, for us, the only change would be in the investment required for the rescue boat. So we'd be looking for a vessel of a certain size and certain engine capabilities, and that would essentially be it. So there's very little year-to-year cost other than maintenance of the boat. We don't staff firefighters in order to be ready for this service. This is a service that we can provide with our current staffing for all of our services. So essentially, we're looking for $90,000 that would come out of reserve, so no impact to our budget that way, in order to provide that service. And the Coast Guard would in turn provide us some training and logistical support with regards to events that occur up and down the river. Now, just to be specific, this picture doesn't necessarily look like what it is we would buy, but it's representative. We would still need to buy something that we can trailer in order to be able to cover above and below the deck.
Councillor Mack?
Yeah, I was just wondering, what area would you be responsible?
So we would be responsible for the areas that are essentially adjacent to the city border. However, in situations where maybe other municipalities require the help or the Coast Guard require the help, then we would probably look at enacting, ultimately council could look at enacting agreements with municipalities in order for us to provide further services. I'm
thinking of Akwesasne. They have an excellent water program with I think they've got a pretty sophisticated rescue boat, don't they?
They use airboats.
Yeah.
They have a number of airboats.
And the RCMP keep 2 boats at the marina.
Yep.
Okay. Could they be used?
Well, they could be used. I cannot speak to Akwesasne's training certification or capabilities, but I know that the RCMP really have a very specific mandate. So if it's a rescue component, what we've seen is we're usually, here's the thing about waterborne rescues is they're low probability, but they're high consequence, right? The outcome normally isn't that great. So what happens is time is always an important factor, and we know that we're very quick to get on the water and into those locations, and that's, I mean, that's been...
Trailer, wouldn't you just keep it at the marina?
Well, no, because what happens is we get a call above the dam, we have to be able to respond and launch at Gatineau Park very quickly.
Yeah, okay, makes sense.
Councillor Gardner and then Councillor Bennett.
And I'm asking you if we would have some sort of a contract like the fire department has, if they have to go to Glen Walter or out of the city limits, we recuperate the costs from that. So would that apply to the boat also?
Yes, exactly. So typically automatic aid would include some sort of cost refund provisions. We do that with, for example, we provide aerial vehicle support to local municipalities at a cost recovery, and that's a contract that we have.
Thanks.
Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just for my own clarification, the $90,000, is that what the estimated full cost of the boat is, or is that?
Correct. That would be boat trailer engines.
So these things have already been shopped out, so you...
Yeah, we've been looking over the last few years, so we're confident that budget would be able to help us meet our needs.
It just seemed low to me.
That's good. We've done our work.
Do you want one too, Councillor Bennett?
Logo deal.
Oh, the motors are on.
Thank you very much.
Is that it?
That's it.
Councillor Bergeron? Okay.
Give this a little bit of thought. So
Sure.
I'd like to talk about the business plan again. I think the question's for the CFO again.
Okay.
What's the consequence of deferring this until we have a business plan?
Actually, suppose we could repeat the question?
Sure. Because I turn around, sorry.
Yeah.
What's the consequence of deferring this $8.7 million decision until we have the business plan, which is coming very soon, we hope?
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'd probably like to redirect the question to the chief because it is his operation and it's operational in nature.
So I would assume, so the danger is, I mean, what we're trying to do here is make sure that because we're going to get the report and also hopefully maybe a presentation from the company that did the work in year, we would like to be ready in order to be able to move ahead in year as well. So that's the intent behind identifying the estimate in the budget for this year. My concerns are, so I was able to find no less than 7 different reports over the years of station relocation, and I'm going to make an assumption here that what occurs is by the time the reports show up that makes very specific recommendations on parcels of land that are available for purchase around the city, by the time the city would enact that, if we were to take that approach, then maybe those pieces of land aren't available anymore, and that shifts the plan completely into a bit of a cycle here. So the intent for us is that we would like to get in the position where, once the report comes to council and council endorses that we could move ahead and with the purchase of the land and start site prepping and start designing in this current year as well.
But so, again, I think the question is for the CFO, because I was told earlier that we would not, that $2.9 million is not actually being borrowed this year. Right?
Through you, Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
It wouldn't be borrowed this year, so there's no impact on the 2019 budget. When we start to incur costs, we may short-term borrow until we're ready to long-term borrow, and that's when it'll start affecting our annual debt payments, et cetera, for fire services.
Okay, thank you. So then if I can understand the process, when the business plan comes to us, we can perhaps, and I'll just throw this out as a hypothetical, not approve the training center portion of this, and the budget would therefore be lower to reflect that, is that correct?
Well, yes, and conversely, council could approve the purchase of the land, but nothing else, right? Like, all of the elements of the project are going to end up here anyways for your consideration and decision. And so this is a bit of a notional, giving us we're mating this amount in the budget with what's going to be coming to you in the next couple of months.
I appreciate that. I think I have an issue with the process in general, but that is it's not for today, I don't think. But
Well, it can be, Councilor Bergeron.
well, it's not related strictly to this fire department. The idea that if we put something on the books, it's kind of approved, but that's not what we're doing. We're putting it on the books so that you can continue to move forward. So I don't know what the motion would be. I don't know how that would be addressed right now. So you've answered my questions very well, thank you.
Does the COO want to make a comment?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think that when we have projects such as this one, like this is a fairly key project for the municipality, we want to make sure that we have support from council as we're moving through this project. So part of the timing of the report coming from Colliers in the next couple of months, and we're at the budget process right now, but I think that with the work that's been done and the work that's been done with our previous council, our recommendation or our request tonight as far as our priority goes is that we want to start to plan and move forward, right? So it should from our perspective be clearly identified in the budget process. We do only finance as we incur those costs, but if an opportunity arises and we have an opportunity to purchase the ideal site for our location, those are the types of decisions we're going to start to come to council and close, by the way, to start that process and that plan. So by identifying in the budget process, I think that we're seeking approval to kind of start to make that project come to fruition. So if it's not council's intention to move forward with the project, then I think these are discussions that need to be, identified sooner than later. We can wait for the presentation from Colliers, but then there might be, I don't know that we want to necessarily defer the project. We know the project is going to take multiple years to complete. So I'm not sure if that assists with your...
It does. I think business plan to me means something maybe a little different. It's usually step 0 in a process of work. So I have a hard time seeing something that doesn't have a business plan that is complete. And it sounds like I may be the only one, which is okay. So I would like to make a motion that we defer this until there's a business plan and see that it be defeated otherwise.
That's a valid motion. Is there a seconder?
Thank you.
There's no seconder. I will recognize Councillor Grant.
No, I'm not.
I guess what, the way I see this is we're agreeing in principle to the purchase of land, the acquisition of a new fire station and training center. The various components of that will be coming back after the report from Collier. And so I think I can agree with the principle of that motion, and we can then debate the merits of what goes into that later on.
The CEO would like to respond to that.
Thank you, and that is accurate, Councillor Grant. I think also to keep in mind that any expenditure related to these projects always comes back to council for council approval. So there will be the opportunity for council to not approve the expenditure. So we'll bring the business plan forward. If the business plan is not endorsed by council, or council decides at that point in time they want to pause or defer the project, it can be. But, and then once the project, and then if it is approved, then what we will do is then we will start to work through our design, tendering process, right? So if we get approval for the project following the business plan, well then we look at that, or we will interpret that as our ability to go ahead and start to look at issuing all of the other steps through that process to make the project move forward. So the business plan is still something that's pending, but by the same token, we are identifying this through the budget process as something that we think that we will start to begin spending dollars on this year.
Thank you. Chief Voisin, did you want to add anything to that?
Maybe just, I think there's an element of transparency that I'm trying to bring to council here in terms of making sure that there's no surprises. I think the worst thing that I could do would be to show up here with an 8.7 million expenditure that you didn't expect would show up. So there's a little bit of that as well.
Fair.
Thank you for that. Can you remind us again of the timelines around what's next?
Well, I think so in the next few months we'll come back with the report that essentially outlines the details and the costing of the project, recommended sites, and then next steps with regards to that. What I think we would like to accomplish this year, there's a lot of work that goes into this, would be to identify and purchase the site, begin site preparation, and begin the design of the building.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Voisin.
Madam CFO, I think, are we ready for transit? Wait till you see these pictures. Gorgeous. It's C40.
Transit only has 5 capital projects, so I'd like to talk about 2 of them together, C40, C41, which are costs as both conventional and handy transits. So the this is part of moving forward with our bus replacement, fleet replacement program. It is our intention to buy one handy transit bus, one conventional bus each year for as long as it takes us to reduce the age of the fleet. So in the conventional side of things, if we buy these two conventional buses, it would reduce the age of our conventional fleet from 9.4 years to 6.6. So we're actually getting rid of two very old buses that we have bought refurbished from another property. They're going to be 21 years old, so 1998s, which is see there. And although it's in very good shape, there is maintenance cost with keeping it up to par on the road. So it'll be two buses of this nature. Sometimes these things change because we do have 6 Eldorados, and those are 10 and 11 years old. We would like to keep those for a number of years, but some of them are causing us some problems. And really, we kind of review with the maintenance department to see what's the best options. Do we want to spend some money to keep a bus around, or do we need to replace that bus?
Councillor Mack?
Question I get asked, Len,
Yeah.
why do we need such big buses when people watch the bus go by with 7 people on sometimes? You got the answer?
I do. Last year, we transported over 870,000 passenger trips. So there's going to be empty buses at some point along the route. But believe me, we are very busy. The reasons we moved back to 40-foot buses from the shorter 30-foot buses was basically is the mobility aids that are getting on the bus now. So people in wheelchairs are riding more and more conventional buses, which is what we wanted to so that we would have people move from the very expensive handy transit service onto the conventional bus. Gives everybody the flexibility to travel. But when you put a wheelchair on that small bus, it's very, very tight in there. A mother with a stroller is having difficulty, a senior with a walker. We're getting a lot more mobility aids, so therefore, that's the reason we're moving from the 40 to the 30-foot bus. The other thing I will say about the difference between, besides the 10 feet in the bus, is really the cost of the bus is the driver in the front and the engine in the back, right? So the rest is really space. And the new Nova buses are actually much more cost efficient to run than older Eldorado 30-footers. So that would be my answer to that.
Okay. Good.
Councillor Towndale?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a quick address to Councillor McIntosh. I was in Kingston for an exercise one weekend. Buses were empty there too. It's not a Cornwall thing. It happens. So when people say that happens here, I don't think that's an issue. You answered one of my questions though, Mr. Tapp. Thank you. Because I was going to ask if you're going to purchase more Nova buses, and I think it's great. Standardization. I think we'll always see cost efficiencies. I had a quick question about the if you do replace the 98 buses, you mentioned they're refurbished. I remember, I think that we approved the purchase last term, but even though they're that old with the refurbishment, do you think there's any resale value in those, or what would you do with them when you're done? Just more curiosity.
Yeah, we're never going to get a lot of money for those buses. If I throw out a figure, I wouldn't want to be held to it, but maybe $5,000 would be, because of the way we now use Gov, I think it's Gov deals. Yes. So we get a lot more exposure. We're actually getting more money than we used to. Sometimes we have to sell it to Stratford for $500. It's going to cost to sell it away.
I could see a tiny house going into
What I'm
one of
thinking
those.
right now.
Restaurant?
Wow.
Tiny house?
Yeah. HGTV.
Thank you.
Have Councillor Gardner and then Councillor Bergeron. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You remember me from a few years ago, coming back from Quebec City, so you have a pretty good indication that my question is, why have we not moved to electric buses like a lot of the communities done and done away with gas.
Well, not a lot of communities have gone to electric buses, but there is experiments going on in the larger cities. For instance, Montreal have gone to some routes where they have electric buses. The infrastructure is very costly. The bus itself is very costly. It's not proven material. So the ones that are that I've seen at trade shows was $1 million for a electric bus. You would get 12 kilometers out of it, so 6 kilometers one way and 60 the other way. But it did have, but you needed the infrastructure. So when you got to the end of the line, there was a big charger that came down and it recharged the bus for another 12 kilometers, but it only took 3 minutes. But the outlay of cost is just not feasible for Cornwall. I think that we let the bigger players take this on, they reduce the cost, and then that's when we would get into that sort of thing. I do remember the 12-seater that you talked about from Quebec City, and I looked that bus up, and it was an Italian bus. The cost was enormous, and again, it could only run 4 hours before needing a full recharge overnight. And the technology's gotten much better. It will get better, but we're not there just yet.
Secondary question is, I remember years ago talking about the large buses being harder on the infrastructure even than that because they were heavier. Have these buses now lower tonnage, or are they lighter than they used to be? Or the same type of infrastructure, the same build?
Yes, they are lighter, and one of the biggest reasons is something they call multiplexing. So what they used to have is tons and tons of wires running through the buses that so you needed one wire to operate the headlights or one to operate.
So it's easier on the infrastructure.
So now the same wire is operating both the headlights, taillights.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Bergeron.
Thank you. I'll scratch my electric bus question. But the photo on C40 is a 40-foot bus. Does that mean we already have these buses in our in circulation?
Sure. We have this is an Orion 6. That's one that we.
This isn't the bus we're purchasing.
No, this is the one we're getting rid of.
Okay. So my question was going to be: should we not already know if there's an impact on the handy transit budget? But I guess we don't have those new buses. You mentioned that more people will take these buses, and it will reduce costs of operating handy transit. If we already had those buses in place, we would know what that difference would be.
So I guess I don't know if I could say that we would reduce the handicap transit costs, but it would give the people more flexibility to use these buses and move away from handy transit. You're always going to need handy transits, especially in Cornwall, because there's a lot of places where, well, we just don't have sidewalks, different streets going up and down. You wouldn't get a 40-foot bus up there, that sort of thing. The thing with the handy transit service is because we're an older community, we're 2 years on average older than Eastern Ontario, which is older than the province itself. So those things have an effect because a lot of our handy transit registrants are senior citizens. So those are the people that we can move some of them onto a more comfortable riding experience on a conventional bus. So we're always looking for people moving off of the system, but unfortunately we're at that crossroad where we move some off, move some on type of thing. Hopefully eventually we would be able to put a system in where you'd have less reliance on handy transit and more on the conventional side of things.
Thank you. That's very clear.
So,
go ahead.
So part 2 of this is then and by the way, I mentioned 1 and 1, but in this case, we wanted to put in two buses because we're kind of in a stage where we're front load getting some of these Nova buses on the property. They come through the Metrolinx deal, which is a procurement that the province runs. So the province, we buy buses along with Peterborough and other stores, that the cost is reduced and we get a, well, for instance, I don't have the expertise to spec out a bus on every type of component that's on that bus. So there's industry people from all the different properties who actually spec out the bus, and then they have a base bus, here's the price, and then we look at what they provide and we say, okay, well, we want that, we don't want that, so it's, so the components that we want, better seats, we might buy better seats, but we don't need that, alternator. We'll get another type of alternator, which might be something that all our buses have that type of alternator, so we want to keep it straight. So there's a cost going up and down all from the base bus. That's how it works. But it's built in St. Eustache. There are inspectors hired by Metrolinx at no cost to the city of Cornwall, so that they can inspect those buses and make sure that everything is up to par. So it's a really, really good deal for Cornwall and smaller properties. Because if we went out and bought 1 or 2 buses a year, it could get costly. But if you're buying 20 or 30 of them, well, then you got more buying power, obviously. It's the same thing with the handy transit buses. Same type of thing, and they've got high floor handy transit buses, they've got low floor handy transit buses, and they're actually looking at a smaller version of a handy transit bus. And this council has signed on to the Metrolinx deal, so anything that we purchase is going to be through that approval and that agreement. So again, with handy transit, we would be with the purchase of 1 low floor bus, we'd be reducing the handy transit age of the fleet from 4.9 to 4.4, which is phenomenal. At one time we were up around 7 or 8. So ideally, what you want to do for your conventional fleet is 7, 8 years. That's topping out. And for the conventional bus, you don't want to go much over 5 years, because really the way they call them is 5-year throwaway buses, because now our maintenance department has done an excellent job of keeping these things on the road. So I don't want to give anybody the impression that they're not being maintained and whatnot. But at some point, the cost, and I think Councilor Grant, if I remember from a term before, you were saying, at what point do you say, well, you should buy a new bus instead of trying to repair the old one? So it's so that's the business plan there. C42 is the Transit Cube van, and it has there's a picture of the present vehicle that we have. We want something very similar to that. One of the major points of this particular vehicle is the liftgate on the back. It is just so useful. We have vaults that we are very, very heavy, that we transport with money in it. We have bus stops that we clean, bus shelters, so all the materials and pressure washers and everything that goes on. And then I'm not talking about your regular pressure washer. It's a large scale industrial operation type of thing. So it stores all of that type of thing. Plus, other departments do borrow it from time to time, and it's just a very, very useful and versatile vehicle for us. And it's in pretty rough shape. The next one is the vehicle and hoist repair and safety.
Look at that picture.
So that's the picture that, by the way,
Love it.
some ribbons from my colleagues. But what we don't see in this picture, and is just outside of the picture, is the control panel that is in the floor, and it's kind of a hit and miss. So when you're raising that up, one might raise and the other one doesn't. So it's a safety. So they got to be really very careful. It's not going to fall. They know what they're doing, but it's not working properly. Even though it's inspected annually, it's been told that we need some work on those and to repair and replace them. But just to comment on that is it kind of gives you know, people get the impression that bus going up and down the street all the time, but this is the behind-the-scenes type of thing that happens at transit to keep those buses running. Lastly, we have, the passenger counter. And, so what we're looking for is, this is the next phase. So in 2019, we've got some updates. We'll have a new voice enunciation system in place with outside announcements, which will bring us up to the AODA standards and law. And that should be done by the end of March. And the AVL portion, including the web application, the phone application, should be up and running by the end of May. So that's kind of where we're standing on that. Phase 2 of this is we wanted to carry on is new technology with a passenger counter. Important to, so that I pick my glass up and make some notes here. I want to make sure I get this right. To provide accurate ridership counts. Ridership is geared toward our gas tax funds, so we want to make sure that it's as accurate and as much as possible, and we're reporting correctly. And it will support any route or bus stop revisions. And we've just been in there before, and we had, you know, a petition and whatnot, but this would be perfect because then you're just going to be able to go to the computer and say, this is how many people got on, this is how many people got off at any given stop at any time of the day. So that's where we're moving into. And that next stop, or that next step technology could move us toward contactless payment system. So that's is something where, you know, cash is just going the way of the dinosaurs. So we need to keep up with that technology. So putting this into place will be helpful in moving the next step toward that.
Okay. Councillor Grant?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This would help with your audit as well. Don't you have to justify the numbers to them, how many passengers you have? And
Yes, we do,
counter,
yeah.
help with your audit?
Yes, it would, yeah.
Councillor Bergeron?
Can you just discuss with the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, how that process works, because all your projects are dependent on it, just so we...
Right, and I need to mention that. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. So 3 of the programs, the Next Stop and the buses, are based on receiving ISIP funding. And that funding is not finalized. So we're not quite sure where it stands. We do know that there was a number given to us from each of the 3 parties, and it was mentioned in one of the reports that I put forward because we had to come to council and ask to pay for the bus wash by financing because we couldn't use this funding and it's not finalized. There's really hasn't been a lot of activity or a lot of information on when this is going to be actually be available to us. What I do know is each project that you will get any funding from, you will have to apply for that funding. It's almost like a grant type of program. So that's really all I know now. It's there. The feds and all provinces and territories have signed an agreement for it to come into force, but when and how it's going to be unfolded is still a bit of a mystery. So in fact, we may not be able to buy buses because it's based on here, unless I come back to council and say, well, we gotta do it differently and that sort of thing.
So follow up on the last item, C44. You just mentioned to Councillor Grant that this does not include. It sounded like doesn't include the ability to pay with Interac or a credit card. That would be the next phase.
It could be the next phase. I'm not quite sure. I don't know enough about the technology that could come online. It could be we put some of the things into place, but the eventual goal would be to have Interac, Visa, web-based payment, pay in advance, just anything but cash is what it comes down to. Mind you, we're going to have to phase it in because we do have a lot of passengers still with seniors that do use cash, so we'd have to come up with a slow phase-in so that everybody is covered.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Can you repeat the number of rides? What was that number you gave earlier on?
870,000 paid trips.
It's a
worthy of
surprising,
applause.
yeah, it's a surprising and wonderful number. So how many people then actually use transit on a regular basis? Can you extrapolate that? Can you say 1,800, 2,000 people in Cornwall? Do you know?
I tried to do a calculation, but it's never possible to really pinpoint it. Maybe with the new technology, I'll have a better idea, but a few years ago, I came up with about 3,000 regular riders. I do know that we have like 1,500 registrants on Handy Transit. They don't all use them because nursing, anybody in a long-term care home would automatically get put on there, and they may only use it once in a while. So my best guess would be about 3,000 citizens use it on a regular basis.
Okay. Thank you. How many budgets have you presented to council, Mr. Tapp?
Too many. Could be my last one.
What? Is it?
Maybe.
Maybe? That's why I'm asking. Thank you very much, Mr. Tapp.
Thank you.
Why would you say that? So much fun.
It is now. It wasn't before.
Aw, nice one, Mr.
With
Tapp.
that,
Councils before, believe me.
That's out of the bag.
So he leaves with a shot.
Mr. Saint-Marseille, what's next?
Waste management. So Mr. Goodwin will be coming to present page C47 to council.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our first project that we're presenting for your consideration is as part of the landfill operation. As we add material to the landfill, we put pipes into the ground that collect the leachate, and that goes to our wastewater treatment plant. And then we also put a set of pipes in that collect the methane gas, and that's burned in our flare to sort of reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the landfill. That's our first project. The next project we have on C48.
Oh, Mr. Bergeron? Councillor Bergeron, sorry.
Also, Mr. Bergeron.
You are?
Just a general question. Do we track our carbon footprint as a city or as a waste management division? Is that even factored in?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we do measure the gas collected, and so we know through the flare what the greenhouse gas emissions are. So we keep track of that. We don't track the other parts of the greenhouse gas emissions. We do approximately know the sort of the fuel requirements that would be in the truck, but the one we know 100% for sure is the greenhouse gas emissions that get flared through the landfill.
Thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth?
Well, I don't really know if this is a good question or not, but in terms of methane gas, is there any way of, I don't know how I want to word this, but is there any way to like market it, or like is there any business possibilities in people looking for methane gas out there?
Through you, Madam Chair. Right now, there are different methods that you could look at. We had done a fair bit of work with the previous government, getting ready for some of the projects that were in our cap and trade. Currently, right now, one method would be to convert the methane into liquefied natural gas. The market for that right now is just in BC, maybe a little bit in Quebec. Some of the bigger municipalities, because they're really close to pipelines, and have converted their collection fleet to use natural gas, then they're offsetting some of their fuel costs.
Right. So, safe to say, currently, in the province of Ontario, very, at best, minimal commercial prospects at this point? Is that safe to say, with us trying to peddle something that we basically are producing naturally in its own way? To whomever.
It's a fair question, and I think part of the answer, and I'll let Mr. Goodwin elaborate after too, maybe, but certainly it really relates to the capacity of the landfill. So there's the amount of gas that you produce is proportional to the size of the landfill site, and there is a critical mass of landfill that would justify a business case for putting in the technology to clean and capture the gas. So there are many larger landfills that do that and would put it into production.
So we're not
But
big
we're,
enough.
I think that's part of the answer, that we're just not big enough with our capacity to justify the investment.
Trying to invest that kind of, not enough return based on the amount we produce.
That's right.
Okay,
Exactly.
thank you, Your Worship.
I don't know if you want to elaborate further.
Yeah, I
Carl?
think, through Mr. Chair, the current market isn't local, so it gets very expensive to clean the gas, and then you need to highly pressurize it to get it sort of outside of the region. So then the payback, John is correct, because of the amount of gas we're making, that payback of the equipment gets very, very long. Right now it's BC, so we fundamentally have to get it to BC.
Pretty impractical. Okay, thank you, Your Worship. I was just curious.
Mr. Goodwin?
Our next project on C48 is part of the building condition assessment, our asset management plan. So there's some projects here, upgrading the lighting. We'll go to LED, so we will be able to get some savings there. We have some doors that are need to be changed. The roof at one of our buildings is gone. There's a concrete floor that has met end of life, partially due to, in previous years, a fire. And we've also would like to get a second security camera so that we get cameras looking sort of both ways in and out of the landfill.
Go ahead.
On the next page, C49, this project is part of our waste management diversion review and program implementation. So some of the elements that we'd like to work on to improve diversion. So this particular project is to look at ideas for removing the organics from the landfill. Currently, the government has not said anything negative. They still appear to be going forward with the zero waste. Danielle's had some conversations, and same with myself, in two different areas, one in wastewater and one in solid waste. The indication still is that the government is going to say that we need to remove all organics from the landfill, and there are some tentative dates by inside the project. So this particular project would see which methods might apply to Cornwall, and then we could bring them forward in this report to council and look at some of the feasibilities and get direction from council with ideas that they might want us to pursue.
Councillor Mack and then Councillor Ibach.
The residential, the curbside residential audit, roughly 54% of garbage collected is made of organic waste. How do they know that?
They, through you, Madam Chair, what they do is they take the garbage bags and pull them apart and count them.
They've done that here?
Oh, yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
And I've been blaming the skunk all the time.
Would they give us numbers? It would be nice to get that numbers.
Discuss.
Okay, my own, I'm looking at, of course I compost, but I find that a high number. over half your garbage would be banana peels and whatnot.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I could also mention that Danielle, our waste supervisor, just recently, this past year, was certified to be able to do that. So we would be able to do those certified audits in-house if you wanted some more data.
Yeah, no, I'll take your word for it.
Mr. Saint-Marseille?
And it, following on what Mr. Goodwin indicated, it was a very comprehensive audit. It was quite interesting to see. They divided up and got representative areas within the whole part of the city, so the various collection networks. And instead of the garbage truck picking up the garbage, it went into,
I see.
it went into a truck.
Okay.
And so they
Thought they
collected
would rip out the
everything.
bags on the
They
street.
went, yeah, this is like forensics 101, and they took it to the landfill site and took apart the garbage bags and divided it up and grouped it into organics and otherwise. So it was, it's very telling.
They draw straws for this one, or? Okay.
Yes, there are other questions. Councillor Hidbayah.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I may regret this, but I'd like to volunteer to do some of those audits. I think it would be really interesting to see, once you rip up these garbage bags, what our residents aren't recycling. And no, I'm not even kidding. I would be interested in participating in those kinds of audits. I've actually seen some cities do a similar initiative, but at festivals, where they take their garbage at the end of the festivals and sort it to audit, what's being thrown out in these parks, but then they also sort it to then dispose of it properly. So instead of having recycling bins and garbage bins in parks, people are just throwing everything in the black bin, and then there's a team of volunteers that sort through and recycle. Could be something to look at one day. Anyway, and I certainly do believe that about half of the garbage folks are throwing out is organic if they're not composting. Because if you're considering municipal compost, it's not just the banana peels and the ends of your carrots, it's meats and dairies, and so all foods and it's organic waste in general. So it's actually quite a bit. And so it would be a huge win for our diversion rate. And so while this project is being looked at, I'm wondering if there's any consideration at a regional organic waste facility, because I think if there's a timeline here of 2025 for municipalities to be composting their organic waste, then our surrounding municipalities will be looking at the same initiatives. And so I think one of the reasons why we haven't looked at this is the cost. It's quite expensive, of course, to open up a organic waste composting facility. So I think the idea of partnering with our neighboring municipalities might be something that we could explore. I'm not sure if that's been considered, but if we all have to jump on board, we might as well do it together.
Mr. Goodwin?
The regional approach is something that we always do. John's given us very good direction. We use some of John's contacts, and Danielle, we are talking. I just got back this morning. Myself and our wastewater treatment plant supervisor were just at a conference and talking about organics and biosolids, and some of the organics that we use go into the wastewater. So they're pretty much tied, and those two departments are looking at it. So gave us some other ideas. Stratford is looking at a regional approach for their organics, and that's all the smaller communities are really looking at partnerships. So it's great idea.
We certainly see it as a shared service.
Yeah, so we will definitely put that in mind. Thank you.
Excellent. It's really loud.
That was loud, yeah. Phew.
That's his wake-up call.
Yeah. Councillor Gardner?
Oh, I'm good, thanks. It's all garbage to me.
Oh. It's getting late, I think. I'm tired.
It's kind of like the future, but whatever.
Truthfully, I compost too. And it goes
Councillor
into my
Bergeron?
garden.
Yes. So this is just for a $10,000 feasibility study, correct?
Correct, yes.
But this could have a multi-million-dollar impact on the future of the city. Can you speak to that, maybe about how it would affect the landfill, the length of the landfill, or the term we have left there, because that's going to be a big upcoming project? What I mean by that is, if we are able to reduce down to 50%, which seems mandated, what kind of impact would that have on the long term?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the next project, we also are asking to be able to start creating the terms of reference that would create the EA for some other disposal of waste at the end of the landfill. So these things sort of go together as well. So what you might want to do for organics would also impact what the next method of disposing of your solid waste might be. So you're correct that we could change the life cycle of the current landfill that we're running with the organics. At the same time, we need to consider that approvals for projects is a lengthy process. It's a multi-year process, even to get an organics. I gave you the example that we talked about the city of Stratford, and they're trying to start. They're 5 years into their project, and they're trying to get the ministry is working with them to accelerate, and they're about to start building. So 5 years out is only 5 years. Then we only have 5 years left of the landfill. So we will be considering all of those things. So it will be really interesting, I think, to start to look at some of those ideas, and as we bring those to council, which direction you might suggest we look at.
So I suppose the point I'm trying to make clear is that the feasibility study to me is a no-brainer. It's the impact of that feasibility study. If we're able to reduce our organic waste collection in the city by 50%, which is the mandate, we are talking about multi-million dollars of savings, perhaps, or was that included in the RFP that we just approved, or is the idea of organics separate that would have to come back to council?
Through Madam Mayor.
Yes.
So you're correct. If we were to remove that 50%, although we need to keep in mind that 50% is the 50% of the residential collection, it doesn't include some of the other solid waste materials that go into the landfill. We have run a couple of numbers through a couple of different models, and we would be able to suggest that some of the organics models might give us an opportunity in life cycle costs to be able to initiate some projects. The risk is that it's unlikely that we'd be able to remove enough of the organics quickly enough through that approval process to not have to do some sort of alternative disposal, add another cell to the landfill. Fundamentally, we could save a lot of money if we were able to find a solution that would work in Cornwall. Although we still have to move forward with finding another disposal method.
And could you maybe speak to the RFP if this falls under, or in theory?
Mr. Saint-Marseille?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. So the RFP element did not speak to the organics per se.
No.
But what we want to do, and council will be seeing some information in an upcoming meeting in terms of what we want to do with the updated waste management bylaw. So it's a great question in terms of a segue to that, where we're trying to inform the public and have them react to do additional diversion, whether it's through the blue box or some considerations on composting. so that we can reduce the inbound waste stream to our landfill site. That is the cheapest option, whether you're, if we look at a wastewater treatment plant, it's cheaper to reduce the amount of flow into the plant than it is to pay money to treat more. So that's an end-of-pipe solution, which is very expensive. So if you can do an at-source control on any environmental type model, that is far more cost-effective. So if we can have people reduce the footprint of what they're producing at the landfill, whether it's or that's going to the landfill, whether it's organics or diversion to the blue box, that makes a lot of sense. And the project that we're going to speak to next that Mr. Goodwin mentioned is looking at the long-term options for the landfill site. So we have to consider the inputs from those various contributions, and any reduction is going to extend the life of the landfill site, and the options that we'll look at, we'll consider those. And again, we're not looking exclusively at just our landfill site in terms of organics. As he indicated, we're looking at the bigger picture. So maybe there's an opportunity for a mixed solution with some of the organics being managed at the wastewater treatment plant, and also some through an organics collection program, because we're not going to capture everything. So we're doing a broad-based integrated approach amongst our department to make sure, because that's the way the environmental solutions work best in terms of modeling those.
Thank you.
I hope that maybe
answers,
that's a little
yeah,
bit.
that's very clear.
Okay, thank you.
I want to follow up on that. So how much will it cost to close our landfill and find a new landfill?
So that's the next project, Madam.
Are you going to answer that question, though? Because
Yes.
I want to know what that number is.
Well, in about 10 years ago, we had estimated that you're looking at about $50 million to look at options for upgrading the landfill. The closure plan itself.
50 million?
50 million to expand our landfill up to that. That was a rough estimate, but what we need to do with the project that's described on C50 is actually go through the process, develop the terms of reference, and to look at whether it makes sense to go to a new landfill, look at other considerations in terms of, some future opportunities. Maybe energy from waste makes sense in the future again, that we used to call incineration. That's really not something that's very popular right now, but maybe that's part of the consideration. Or do we look at expanding our landfill upwards, for example? So we have additional airspace above. So those are all options that are under consideration. And then we need to look at the costs associated with that. So it was estimated a number of years ago that we could be looking at, it's tens of millions of dollars, and it's going to take, it'll take us maybe 10 years with the approvals process to get there. That's why 2030 is really not that far out in terms of a planning window.
But it's important for us to have that number in our heads as we debate all of these things. I understand about the process and the long term and breaking it down, but we have to have that number. It's important for the community to understand the cost of that, and it's coming soon.
So one of the things, if I could add to that, Madam Mayor, that's very important, and it speaks to each cubic meter of capacity that we have at the landfill currently, and that is worth gold to us. So every cubic meter of space that we can preserve is huge. I don't have the number, but it's tens of thousands of dollars for every cubic meter of capacity that we can preserve, because that's monies that we would have to spend, down the road, and we will have to spend. So we absolutely have to embark on these programs to improve our diversion rates. We heard before where we need to do better. And so that's part of the initiatives that council will hear about, have heard about with the RFP and discussions about the bylaw updates. And then next week we'll talk more about the provisions of the bylaw updates to try to improve upon those diversion rates. So and a big part of it is public education and outreach. We can't do enough of that.
So would it be fair to say that if we extend the life of our landfill, that we increase the opportunity for better solutions? And is this something that's evolving quickly enough that within 10 years we might have we might be looking at some better solutions to deal with our landfill situation?
There's no doubt that the, you know, the framework of the Waste-Free Ontario Act speaks to that holistically. What will that mean in terms of actual considerations that the province will allow? You know, I recall 20 years ago where incineration was on the table and then it quickly came off the table again too, right? But there's no doubt there's technologies out there that can safely incinerate and collect energy from waste. But by the way, some of that might actually include taking the items that we otherwise recycle that have very strong fuel value, and there's actually a strong business case to say that, you know, for example, we shouldn't recycle, we should actually incinerate that and collect the energy, because plastic bottles are what? They're petroleum products, right? So they have a high intrinsic energy value. But that's counter to what we do right now. So where the policies will be that we have to abide by in terms of provincial standards, we will follow that. But to your point, the more that we can push that window out, then we think the opportunity will be there to utilize some of these futuristic, you know, goals. You know, the idea of sticking waste in a hole in the ground is really archaic, right? I think a lot of people, we have a modern landfill site. It's not a dump. A dump is a hole in the ground, but now we've got features there to minimize impacts on the environment. Mr. Goodwin talked about the leachate collection. We've got, and the off-gassing is collected as well, but maybe there's future things that we need to consider as well. So that will extend our window to consider that.
Thank you. Councillor Mack and then Councillor Gardner.
As a municipality, I guess it's to Maureen, do we have the ability to ban plastic bags?
Yes, we do.
I believe that you
Yes,
do.
we do.
You could pass a bylaw to do that.
Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, I just want to ask this question. How do, Councillor Eber said something about going through garbage bags, but if you go to Nativity, and I'll use a number of other places that have bingos, I've seen 30 and 40 bags of bingo cards going into garbage, black garbage bags.
Mm-hmm.
Why are they allowed to do that? Because if I go to 2 or 3 bingo palaces in this area or places this area, it's always 20 bags, 30 bags, 40 bags. And if that's going into our landfill, that's really filling it up in a hurry. So is there any way we can pass a bylaw where they do it in a different way?
Anxiety.
Well, through you, Madam Mayor, that's a great question, and many municipalities, I think we've talked about this before in the context of the recent RFP, and that is mandatory recycling or clear garbage bags. So many municipalities, I would say most municipalities, have clear garbage bags where the garbage is out at the road, and if there's something in there that's recyclable, depending on how the bylaw is set up with that particular municipality, the bag would be left at the curbside. So if there's an aluminum can, or to your example, paper products or otherwise, it could be recycled. That's a very strong incentive to get people to take that product, put it into their recycling bin, and minimize their waste footprint. So, and that, by the way, is also revenue for us, right? So anything that is capable of being recycled that gets landfilled, we lose twice, because we're losing landfill space, but we're also not gaining revenue by recycling that, because then it's put back into the market, and that's monies for us.
Would it be worthwhile for us to pass a bylaw that these places that use all these cards and all that paper have to put it into a blue box so that it does go into recycling of paper?
Mm-hmm. The answer is yes, and it's incumbent on, I think, on all generators, so not just the IC&I that you're speaking about, but the 15,000 households. So that's actually part of our solid waste management master plan, ultimately, to roll out. We don't have it in the current framework of the solid waste bylaw update that council will see very shortly, but it is in our solid waste management master plan to move to, you know, for example, clear garbage bags. That would speak to that. And we also talked about mandatory recycling, right, as you know, as that opportunity where to pick up your garbage, you would also have to have your recycling bin out. That's not popular, But that speaks to what you're describing, Councillor.
That amount of paper, if you put them in plastic paper or bags, they're going to end up out on the street somewhere. So I much prefer to have a bylaw passed to put blue boxes in those places and for them to use those blue boxes so that we can recycle that stuff.
You'll have an opportunity to raise that again when we have the bylaw on the agenda.
Okay, I'll do that.
Councillor Towndale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know you haven't really gotten to the meat and potatoes on this particular project, but I know we've talked around it a bit. One thing I just wanted to touch on, because when we were here last year, Ms. Watson had mentioned the possibility of mining in the landfill with the intention of not only potentially creating more space, but before we started recycling, for example, in the city, or even sorting other waste, say bicycles, that kind of stuff like scrap metal, it's been buried under there. So the ability this could actually save us money in the sense that we'd be using the same space, but we're also pulling out materials that we can then turn around and sell or otherwise dispose of in better fashion. So I'm hoping this RFP, once issued, once we get there, it'll look at an option like that, because I'd really be curious to see, what the cost would be. Something tells me it'd be much cheaper than 50 to 60 million. Plus there's a cost recovery when you think about the materials if we pull them out and then are able to turn around and sell those.
That's, through you, Madam Mayor, that's a great comment, and I failed to mention that is one of the options as well for landfill mining. So not only to pull out those products that are possibly recyclable, but also every day we have to do an interim cover material, so we put an inert dirt or soil fill over top of the waste. So there's also an opportunity to claw that back. It sounds very simple. Obviously, it's very dirty, messy work to actually go into a landfill site and separate the dirty diapers off of somebody's bicycle, right? And then, reclaim that. But it has been done, so you're absolutely right. That would be part of the palette of consideration.
Thank you.
Councillor Elaine McDonald?
Yeah, I'm just assuming that when I see plastic bags, they're clear bags of shredded paper. That goes to recycling, eh?
Correct.
But I see them at the curb. Okay, so obviously they're picked up accordingly. Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Goodwin?
We are sort of done because we accidentally, I think, talked about two projects.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, right.
So the last project, C50, is the landfill expansion alternative disposal ECA. So the first part would be determining the terms of reference. That would be the ECA. So that's what we're asking for here. And in this particular project sheet, we identify the cost being between $50 and $60 million to start a landfill. Part of creating the terms of reference could very well be, and will be for sure, because we've identified it from council, to say, dig out a cell and use it and then recover that space. So that could be something that we would look at with this project.
We sort of pre-debated this one, so.
Yeah.
If through you, Madam Chair, a small comment.
Yes.
So we have just recently joined the Southern Ontario wastewater consortium, and they have a group that is looking at taking innovative organic processing and getting it onto the market. So there's members from a whole bunch of different municipalities, Aqua, the innovation branch of the MOE. So that helps us to make sure that we're on the pulse of innovative and have partners at all levels that would do those things. If there's something came up, if we were diverted and an innovation came up, we have created that process so we would be aware of the approvals that we need to do, and there's partners that would help us, being the City of Cornwall, move some of those projects forward if we were to identify them. And they're looking for funding models as well, so they would also be helping with funding.
And who's interested in funding? Is the province or the feds or both or none?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it looks like it's everyone is trying. There is, although they haven't put a number, the province has some money. Oh, I apologize, I can't remember the name that they used in their climate change action plan. In their climate change action plan, they've identified that they're going to create a fund, although they've not put any dollars to that quite yet. So the province has some. It looks like the federal carbon tax will have a fund that we'll be able to apply for, and there are some various research groups that have some funding. One of the groups that was able to access funding in a fairly innovative way is conservation authorities are part of that group as well. So because that ecosystem. So there's 4 or 5 different sources of funding that are that potentially could be available. Some of the unknowns right now are what those dollar figures will be, because they're just rolling out. The Ontario government's one is just rolling out. The federal government is just rolling out as well.
And private sector? No?
The private sector, the only one I know of for is basically in some research demonstration projects. Stratford has, they have a private partner, Guelph has a private partner. There's not a lot, but those are 2 that I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. What's next? Thank you, Mr. Saint-Marseille, as well, then.
Merci beaucoup, thank you.
Bien. We have energy for Parks and Rec?
Can you get started on it?
We can. We can get started.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Mr. Boileau, the other Mr. Fothrop. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Members of council, I can't promise that our photos start off very well, but
yeah, no.
They do get,
yeah, no.
They do get better.
Nope.
They get better.
It's a warning.
The last guy's had a dump. I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a rather boring subject and a rather boring photo. And actually, it's probably the highest priority item we have. So I will let Jamie speak to that. Before he does that, though, I do want to just mention, you'll recall Monday that there was some conversation about the Civic Complex. And so there are some items that are in this budget that are about the Civic Complex that do speak to cosmetic or aesthetic improvements to the complex. Everything from lighting to seating to exterior improvements. You'll recall in the past year or 2, we've done some things that are not so much about aesthetics, the rear ramp, the Brian header on the, so we're constantly with the asset management plan in place, coming ahead with projects that are always trying to improve the Civic Complex or sometimes just maintain it, but I think some of these features are going to improve the aesthetics of the building. So I'll let Mr. Fothrop begin with the less interesting item, but they get better.
Thanks, Mark. So our first project is on page C53, and it's called Arc Flash Analysis. This analysis, it essentially is a study or a review of all the electrical panels within our recreation buildings, and it's required to determine the potential hazard that lies within should there be what's called an arc flash, which is essentially an explosion that's very rare and unlikely to happen, that can happen inside the panel, injuring a staff person that might operate the panel. So what this essentially, what would happen is we would get a label on our panels, like the one you see in the photo, which tells the staff person operating the panel the information about the hazard that lies within and the protective equipment that must be worn when operating the panel. Now, and the Municipal Works Department did a project last year for their buildings as well. So this is to address sort of the health and safety issue with our staff.
Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Is this provincial regulation now?
Actually, no, it's not law as of yet. However, it's become the industry standard. So what we're being told is that should an event happen where someone become injured, the city will be held liable to the industry standard. So, however, there's no legislation saying this must be done. We're being cautioned to say that should something happen, the city will be held liable.
Just seems like a lot of money to me for.
It is quite a bit of money, and we have quite a few electrical panels. So we have a lot of buildings. So every building we have, be it a little washroom for an outdoor pool or at a ball diamond, they all have a main electrical panel inside, and every one of them would get reviewed and get this sticker on it. And then that sticker has to be reviewed every 5 years after that as well to make sure that there's been no modifications. So the initial cost is high. After that, it's a matter of reviewing that same paperwork and making sure that nothing's been done in the meantime. So every 5 years, the cost would not be $125,000.
Councillor Bergeron.
Thank you. So does this cover all of our buildings then? If Municipal Works last year handled some, does the fire department need it? Does the police services need it, or are we covered after this?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I wouldn't be able to answer that. This covers all of our recreation buildings. I believe the Municipal Works Department addressed their buildings. I could not speak for the others like fire or police.
Glenstone Lodge.
Yeah.
Through you,
Yes.
Madam Mayor. I think our current initiative, as I recall, is through the water and wastewater budget, and we had assigned some of those buildings to be addressed through this through the arc flash analysis. I could pull that up, but we have a program to do that to address some of our assets. But the plan right now is to look at those that are under the water and wastewater purview. So it was in part of that budget.
Okay, I don't think that answers completely the question. Are there other buildings that will require this in the future?
Through you, Madam Mayor, very, very well possible. I just can't.
So it's
speak
per
for every
department, right?
That's right.
Chief Voisin, do you have a comment?
I'm hoping to use an alternative measure to get away from that. I can't answer that. I'll have to look and see if arc flash was addressed in both our buildings.
Okay. Mr. Kenville, do you have a comment for Glenstone Lodge?
Not that I am aware of. I don't think any of our panels have been in that.
So does the CEO have a comment?
Through Madam Mayor, I think that we're looking into some information. Part of, and I think we will need to take the question offline and come back to council maybe tomorrow and give you a better explanation. With many of our city buildings, our recreation facilities fall under Parks and Recreation. Our municipal buildings fall under Bill DeWitt's area and Municipal Works. And then we do have our water and wastewater treatment facilities. So I know that we have been going through some projects to deal with arc flash, but I think what we need to do, per your question, we need to take that offline, get an inventory of our buildings, which ones are affected, and come back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cawthorn? Oh, Councillor Gardner?
It'd be interesting to find out through WSIB whether at some point in time this would be mandatory, or if someone was hurt or burned through this arcing, whether they would be covered or not, and what it would make the city liable for if something like that happened, if somebody opened one of those panels.
Oh, an employee would be covered, Councillor Gardner. by WSIB.
I know when I was at Donta, we had a lot of panels, a lot of different machinery that was all tagged when they were down, and I can remember a guy being in a tub, and somebody started it up, and he'd have been pablum if it would have continued, so I think these things are so important for the workers.
Mr. Father, or Mr. Boileau?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I'm not sure whether finance is able to give us the figure that was, that applied to the municipal works buildings. I believe it was substantial as well. The other thing that I would say, though, is that, you know, in a situation where there is an incident, and you've done it in certain buildings and you haven't done it in other buildings, I think we need to be consistent. If we have a program with Arc Flash, I think we need to be consistent with its application.
To Councillor Bergeron's point, right?
Right.
Okay. Councillor Grant?
The Occupational Health and Safety Act, that was my job, health and safety, and the Occupational Health and Safety Act tells you what you must do, you shall do that, and until that time comes, it's good to be proactive. I'm not knocking the proactivity of this here, but that's what really dictates what you do in your facility. And they usually do it because somebody gets hurt, and then they start to enact legislation. So if we get ahead of the curve, it's much better than waiting for someone to get hurt. So the proactivity of this is good.
Councillor Bennett?
I'm just going to make an observation in that every building that has a spray bottle on it has a WHMIS label on it, and what that bottle can do to your skin, and the protective equipment you should be wearing. Let's just use a spray bottle to clean this countertop here. So this is a no-brainer for me. I'd spend that all day long.
Ms. Bailey?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Municipal Works have had a program since 2016 for Arc Flash. They phased in a number of buildings every year, but we can come back to council with that list indicating what buildings have been done.
Thank you. Councillor Grant?
But we can just do a standard for the city, rather than doing it individually, and then where there's a panel, you put that on. Instead of doing it department by department, we can have a standard for the city to do it.
So we're going to talk about that offline. Thank you.
Our next project's on page C54. It's the Aquatic Center ventilation improvements and UV disinfection. Our department retained the services of a consulting engineer to review the Aquatic Center air handling system and our pool filtration system. And they've come up with a recommendation to make improvements to the air handling system as well as implement UV disinfection to the pool. The industry standards since the original pool constructions have changed. They're becoming much more aware of the long-term effects to exposure to airborne chlorine. And so what happens is the chlorine within the pool water will react with the sweat on people's bodies, and it becomes airborne, as well as the spray features that we have in the toddler pool. It puts chlorine into the atmosphere, and then the chlorine is heavier, so it sinks down towards the bottom of the airspace where your swimmers are and they breathe. And so our system now, when it was built, it pulls the air in, it treats it through a dehumidification process and puts it back into the space. There is a certain amount of turnover of the airspace, so fresh air brought in and existing air exhausted, but it is not designed to purely try and target or collect that airborne chlorine within the space. So if you've ever been to an indoor pool, maybe people may remember the old Kinsman Center. If you walked into the Kinsman Center in the lobby, the smell of chlorine hit you in the face. That's not a good sign. That means that what happens is it accumulates and accumulates, and so it starts to deteriorate the steel within the building. Even stainless steel will rust and need to be replaced. And so newer facilities are changing the way they design their handling systems. So the return air ducts that collect the air from the space, in fact, are drawn sort of at that surface level, down low at the pool level, to try and capture that chlorine, and then to exhaust that Now, it'll also grab air, the rest of the system will grab air up at the upper space and treat it and circulate it. So it's, the existing equipment that's in there is still good, it's just a matter of changing the ductwork so that we can collect that air from the low level and treat it. As well, what they're suggesting is if we move to a UV disinfection for our pool, that we will have to put less chlorine in the water. So by using less chlorine, that means less chlorine in this airspace, as well as there are some some sort of measures that you can do, such as insisting the clients take a shower before they enter the pool. So the dirtier people are when they enter the pool, the more chlorine gases that are formed. And so there are consultants stress that, you know, these types of measures are really important. And it's going to, they're reviewing these standards now, and it's going to be increasingly, the regulations are going to change such that the concentrations of chlorine that you keep in pools will likely become lower and lower because of this increased awareness.
Councillor Bergeron?
So first question, I suppose, would be, thank you, sorry. I don't see you in my peripheral here. Why
okay.
wouldn't we switch to a salt-based pool? Would that not be less expensive than this $500,000 commitment?
Well, my understanding is salt-based pools still have chlorine as well. I mean, it produces a chlorine, I understand. And so the issue is still, it still becomes an issue. And my understanding, according to the consultants we hired, they said salt for a pool of this size is not the preferred.
It was considered.
That's right, yes.
Thank you. It says industry standards have changed. Are we not meeting industry standards right now?
I would say for a new, if it were constructed today, it would be designed differently. So we're not in contravention of any regulations. We actually do hire consultants as well to test and monitor the airspace to make sure that, you know, it is not we are below standards and it's not a hazardous environment and it is safe for the public to use. But it's become out of date, and what we are seeing as well is we are seeing a corrosion of materials within the airspace or within that environment, and so we're hoping by implementing something like this that it'll help preserve as well a lot of the equipment.
So thank you. That was going to be my next line of questioning is, I suppose it relates more to asset management and the long-term financial plan. Since we're talking about financing this, that means that this is part of the long-term plan for the aquatic center as an asset. And is there anything else coming down pipe maybe that, like saving money on whatever you just said there, you used better words.
Yeah, no, we actually, this is one of a number of projects. Last year, we got approval to change the lighting to LED lighting. Yeah. And very similar, that lighting is only 15 years old, thereabouts. But because of the corrosive environment, the physical housing that holds the lights, it is corroded to the point where when you do a repair on it, it collapses on you. So, I mean, that's been done, but there are other, we do have other projects coming in the future, stuff like variable speed drives that'll power the pool pumps so that they can wind down during your low usage times. So they don't, right now they're set to kind of just run full speed. And so you're always filtering the water whether the pool is packed full of kids or not. So in the low usage times when there's nobody in the pool, they can wind down and you save energy. And so anyway, just a couple off the top of my head. But.
Yep, thank you. So let me use my better words.
This
will have an effect on corrosion. It will reduce corrosion, which is a
Right.
savings because you won't have to replace them.
That's right, yes.
I was just going to add, for people who are users of the aquatic center, and I know Councillor McDonald is often there, the ladder for the slide was showing considerable corrosion, and there was a fair amount of money that was required. In fact, all of the bolts that were in the slide had to be replaced, The slide had to be, so, in a 15-year span, you would not expect that to occur, but it's just the environment that it's in. And I think making the environment better will reduce the amount of corrosion.
I should also add that the UV disinfection, there's essentially 4 separate pools within this pool, separate treatment systems. And so we're proposing to just implement UV disinfection within one of those pools as a trial. And it'll likely be either the leisure pool where it's got the air sprinklers or the major pool. And so to see how that goes, because it has the bulbs within that get replaced each year, and so there's a cost associated with it. But then there's also going to be a savings because we'll be using less chlorine within that pool. So we'd like to try it out and see really how it performs, and then if we're satisfied with it, we'd come back and look to implement on the other 4 pools. So that's the slide is its own pool, the whirlpool, toddler pool, and then the main swimming pool.
Councilor Bergeron?
Sorry, that brought up a question. Does that mean then that air handling, though, helps with the corrosion? The UV helps with the chlorine in the water? They're 2 separate things in this.
That's right. 2 separate things will help will help reduce the amount of chlorine within that space.
But you're doing the test in one pool, but the air quality of the entire building will be improved by this.
Yes, the air handling system will make a big improvement on the air quality. The UV will also help to improve that as well, and it should reduce the amount of chemical we use. And so what we're just not sure of is, will the savings we see in the chlorine we use, how that will compare to the cost of replacing the bulbs in the UV disinfection system.
Thank you.
That's a decent pick, Mr. Boileau.
It is beautiful.
That's decent. Okay.
Yeah, it's no hydraulic lift, but
Yeah. We'll try to get one installed.
Our next project is on page C55, and it's really tied in with the one after on C56. They're both related to Brian Tardif Field at King George Park. It's the replacement of the field lighting system and the field safety netting. So the field lighting is mounted on old wooden poles that we're not quite sure the age of them. A number of them are leaning fairly badly, and they have wooden cross members where the actual light fixtures are mounted on. We have experienced in the last couple of years some issues with those cross members rotting and having to replace them. So what we are proposing to do is replace the system with LED lighting, which uses a lot less electricity, and as well, bulbs don't burn out as frequently, so there's some safe maintenance there as well. But both the netting and the light system, they've reached their end of life and are due for a replacement.
Councillor Bennett?
While we're replacing these poles, will they be higher? And I asked that question
Possibly.
because...
We'll be looking to speak to the lighting supplier.
Mhm.
Typically, they will do a design layout for you, which will include a pole height.
Good.
And
You've
so
never
it
played
very
that
well
field
could
at
be
night.
higher. And so users of the field will see an improvement to the lighting, the quality of the lighting.
Yeah, the LED lights for sure. It just, depending where you're playing in that field, those lights are in your eyes. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
That's why you dropped the ball.
That's why I dropped the balls. It's the lighting.
I don't get the excuses right.
Yeah, I'm already starting in ball season, starts in 3 months.
Our next project is on page C57. And that is more LED lighting for our arenas. This is really driven partly by the age of the lighting at the Ed Lumley Arena and the Civic Complex. It is quite old. It doesn't do a great job lighting typically the arena. We've got additional lights that we can turn on for our higher profile games like a Colts game or the OHL exhibition game that is around the perimeter. The only thing, we don't use that extra lighting for every game because this type of lighting, it throws a lot, it generates quite a bit of heat. And so, you know, as you can imagine, it's a space that we're trying to cool. And if that lighting were on for all our minor sports games, it would really impact the quality of the ice. So what we have is house lighting levels that we do get a number of complaints about. But now, if you frequent in many of the arenas in the area, or even in Eastern Ontario, what you're seeing is many are switching to LED lighting purely for the electricity savings and the payback there. As well, they don't generate heat. They will come on virtually instantly, where the ones we have are metal halide, and they take 20 minutes to warm up. So if there isn't programming on for an hour, the lighting is left on because it takes 20 minutes to turn them back on for the next group. But now with LED lighting, I mean, they can be turned on and turned off immediately. They can also be set to have different levels of lighting. So for a minor sports game, it could be very sort of...
You've got questions, Mr. Fother.
Okay,
Councillor
okay.
Hébert, Councillor
Can I tell
Bergeron,
these
Councillor Mack. No, go ahead.
Okay, well, it's sort of unrelated, but on the subject of lighting at the Civic Complex, I've just looked through it quickly, I'm not seeing it in here. Has there been any talks about possibly addressing the lighting in the hallway downstairs where the salons are? Because it's quite dark there. I've rented the space for events and gone out to find the guys in the back and said, hey, can you turn the lights on? He says, yeah, they're on. So it's sort of misleading when you're inviting people down there. It's quite dark and a little dingy. It's lovely, but the lighting makes a big difference.
Yeah, we are. We don't have any money budgeted now to do the lighting within that hallway. We do recognize, though, it is a dark space. We are... The arena lights, for instance, are major users, so there's a big payback, or quicker payback savings for a project like this. But if you've noticed that we have been slowly redoing some of the lighting, so in and around the promenade, around the walking area, around the arena, those light fixtures have been replaced with LED. We had a project, I believe it was approved last year, to renovate the main concourse. So we're kind of still in the middle of that, and in that we will be looking to redo the lighting there as well. And then so likely within the next year or two, we'll be then looking to the basement to do that lighting.
So we'll see that in the 2020 budget. Excellent, looking forward to it.
I can very briefly add as well, that is a bit of a pet peeve of mine too, is that lower section, because it is very dark. In addition to the lighting, the materials are dark. So the ceiling is like a chocolate brown, the walls are brown, and so I know that Jason LaValle, who's our supervisor in the building, has recently painted the halls of the dressing rooms white, and it's remarkable what a difference it makes. So I think in addition to lighting, we will look at other colors for materials. Not that, I mean, we can stay with the same materials, but we can just literally change the color. And that can improve things as well, in addition to coming to you for lighting improvements.
Okay, great, thanks.
Forget the chocolate brown.
Yeah.
Councillor Bergeron, then Councillor Mack.
Thank you. Can you break down the financing here for Benson Center versus Civic Complex? And personally, I would like to see that typically when we're talking about the two buildings, just because they're very different types of assets, if you can.
Sure, yeah, I do have a specific breakdown for each arena, not with me. I'm going to say it was in the Civic Complex was in the 150 to range, or to 200 range. And then at the Benson Center, we were doing all three pads, which were the same, the field house as well as the tennis court as well. They all use, I believe they're 400-watt metal halide lights, and so by switching to LED, it'll be a much lower wattage as well. They don't produce the heat in a space that we're paying to refrigerate.
Madam CFO?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the question. Are you looking for the financing at each facility?
So I'm
The breakdown.
looking for the amount.
So on C-52, page C-52, it provides the information on how each project is funded. So if we go down the list under financing, the first one, the aquatic center, that's the ventilation system. Then we have $550,000 for the civic complex and Benson Center LED lighting. We'd have to see what that breakdown is between the two. And then the art center, as far as recreation.
I think he's looking specifically for this item, how it breaks down between the complex.
For this one.
Right.
Can I ask that that be brought tomorrow as we continue our
Absolutely, yes. No, I have that information on my desk.
I'm certain you do. Next question, can you give a ballpark, I'm not going to hold you to it, maybe if you could bring it tomorrow, rough estimate of how much money we're talking about saving? Because if we're financing it, maybe it pays for itself if the numbers make sense.
Well, I don't have the exact calculations on the payback. I know in speaking with the engineering department, with the street lighting conversion as well, they were looking at a 7 to 8 year payback on those fixtures. So over the course of the lifespan of these fixtures, we are confident they will pay for themselves multiple times over with that savings.
So are we financing it, I suppose, for more than 7 or 8 years? Is the kind of match up?
Madam CFO?
CFO, I guess the CFO.
I'm using the microphone.
So the price at $550, normally we would borrow that between 5 and 7 years. That amount of money.
Thank you.
Councillor Mack and then Councillor Grant.
The civic complex, I can understand that one, but the Benson Center is a bit mind-boggling. Didn't the person who designed this building ever think of LED lighting? I mean, that was in existence 5 years ago.
Well, through you, Madam Mayor, the Benson Center was built a little bit more than 5 years ago,
Yeah.
and the advancements and the price reduction in LED lighting within the last, I'm going to say 5, 6, 7 years has dropped considerably. And so I think the technology that they used at the time was still commonly installed at the time. I think we're just seeing that the LED lighting has become so very, very popular, and the pricing now is very attractive.
And then I'll get ahead of myself here, but the same thing with the ductwork at the Benson Center. I mean, we're talking about a fairly new building, and
well, and
like we're replacing every part in that building, it seems.
Well, and that is I think a design flaw.
Yeah.
Essentially, the ductwork. To me, wasn't designed properly. We can get to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Grant?
I was just going to talk about the return on investment for the LED lights also. With the heating factor, there's an impact on your chilling units as well. So that's a major cost in energy with the chilling units.
And the bulbs last much longer. So the bulbs here they're very expensive to replace because of the accessibility to get the equipment in to do that. So if we have a bulb that's out, we don't call in a lift truck to go and replace it immediately. We typically wait till there's a few of them to do. So we're going to see a much better quality of light and a better service to our client as well.
And I would just add too, as Jamie just pointed out earlier, and as you probably know, we don't normally have all of the lights on, so all of the peripheral lights are not on. They only turn those on for major games. But I would suggest that, improved lighting will make it a more marketable facility. We're starting to see, both, well, of course, curling is coming up, but some major hockey events that are being looked at for the Civic Complex. So, and I'm not talking about OHL, I'm talking about events that occur in a weekend or a week. So they're starting to look at the facility a little bit more, so I think it will make it a more marketable facility.
Councillor Gardner?
To that point, we just spent $324,000 at Allsville Theater to replace the lighting. And to the point you've just made, we've been able to bring in more and more shows because we had the proper lighting. The other thing was we had to change it because it gets to a point where there's no more availability. So you go to one supplier and your costs go through the roof, because he's the only one that's got them. So going in the direction we're going, not a surprise for me, the 500,000 when the theater was 324. So it's a good project, and I'm glad to see it coming, because if you remember, Mark, a number of years ago, I tried to get LED lighting on the roadways everywhere, and the cost was prohibitive at the time. So now I'm glad to see it's happening.
I will also add one little minor detail, which is that council will be happy to know that the scissor lift that we purchased has been saving us considerable money, and it's a wonder how we ever did without it. But it has really been a payback with respect to things like the lighting in these buildings.
Good.
So,
Madam CFO?
Yes, we have the information in our budget book, the split between the two. On C69 is the 10-year capital plan. You'll see under Facilities 1 Complex, Civic Complex LED Arena Lighting, 250. And then under number 3, the Benson Center, the LED Arena Lighting, is 300.
250 and 300.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Bergeron?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, no.
Yes?
Oh, yeah, no, I just did some bad math. I saw the 125, not the...
Okay.
Yep.
You did the good math?
I did the good math.
Ductwork.
Okay, so on page C58, Benson Center Arena ductwork. So specifically, the late summer and early fall, we have issues with high humidity in our each of the arenas on pads 1, 2, and 3. There are times when it's very warm outside and we're trying to cool this space. And so what happens is the moisture in the air will condense on the steel structure supports at the ceiling, and the droplets form, they collect and drop down onto the ice surface and will burn holes in the ice to the point where we have to cancel bookings. Now, it's not a event that happens much during the year, but it's consistently at these times of years. The existing, we have dehumidification systems in them. Pads 2 and 3 share a large dehumidifier, and pad 1 has its own dedicated dehumidifier. And so the systems are running at their maximum capacity, but just can't get the moisture out of the air during those difficult times of the season. And so if you can see in the photo that's up there, it might be difficult because it's all white on white, but there's a large pipe that sort of extends along the wall. So that's the air supply duct. So that's taking, or putting air from the dehumidifier into that space. So it should be dry air. And the darker grill to the right side of the photo is the return duct. But as you sort of see the goalie, it shows you that that's all in one end of the ice surface. So the air at the other end of the ice surface, it's not being drawn out as efficiently. So I was describing it to someone, I said, imagine if you had a tub full of cold water and you wanted to heat it up without overflowing the tub. You would turn on hot water and pull the drain to let water out. But it's all happening at the same end of the tub, and so it would take a lot longer to heat up. But if your drain were at the opposite end of the tub, you could let the hot water in, and it would push the cold water out much more efficiently, and you wouldn't have to leave the tap running as long. So what happens is our dehumidifier's got to work that much harder because it's pulling in air, dry air that's coming back out of that supply duct. So this project will extend that air supply duct to the opposite end of the ice, so that way there's a consistent flow and efficient turnover of the air within that space.
Councillor Towndale?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Is this a design flaw?
I would say yes, it is. I would our HVAC contractor, who's kind of recommended this and helped us troubleshoot this problem, would say the same thing.
Sorry, follow-up question.
Go ahead.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Do we have any recourse against the design?
I'm guessing I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm guessing not 7, 8 years after the fact. But I'm not, I'm not a lawyer. The other complicating factor is, and you can kind of see at the very end of that large pipe, there's a large louver there.
Yeah.
And so what that does is it allows for fresh air to come into the space. So, when the Zamboni runs, it runs on propane, so it does exhaust fumes in the airspace. We have carbon monoxide detectors that when they detect carbon monoxide in the air above a certain level, those things open up, and there's fans at the opposite end that exhaust air out. But at this time of year, it's August, so the fresh air that's being pulled in is 30-degree humid air. And then at the same time, this time of year, this is the time of year we also build the ice. So our guys are there have hoses going, flooding, spraying water into the airspace to sprinkle water on the ice to build it up. So it's just a very difficult set of conditions to design for. And so there's just a lot of moisture being introduced into that space and that we're expecting this dehumidifier to handle.
Councillor Hollingsworth, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I did actually. Sorry, Madam Mayor. It's not the first problem with this building, but I'm wondering if we can explore if we have our legal recourse here, because if this is a design flaw, regardless of how far advanced we are into it, I'd like to know the answer to that, like a correct answer.
Madam CAO?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think we can look into that, but I think, based on some of our experiences with some of our other facilities, and I think it would be a relatively straightforward review with legal counsel. I don't believe that we would be able to take care of it in the next day or two before we, wrap up some of these discussions.
Truth be told, Madam CEO, I'd expect something like that to come back.
Yeah, and I think, we can take a look at it, but I mean, part of the concern might be whether or not we've identified it to the party prior to this point in time, right? So it's also about providing notice. And so I would anticipate that we might not, but we can look into it.
Well, I think it's also a question when we really determined this was an issue.
Yeah.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Kind of along that same line, and it might be to the CAO, Worship, I'm not sure, but is there something we can do in terms of the tendering process, like something we can put in the tender? Because you don't necessarily know there's a design flaw until you've seen the building work through a couple of seasons. And so my point is, we're identifying problems now that would seem to be flaws in either from the architect or the engineers or whoever. Is there anything we can do in future, moving forward, from like a tender, how we write our tenders, to say, look, 5 years from now, if this goes south, we would like to have some kind of recourse. Can we do anything like that? Has anybody ever pursued that? Is it, yeah, well, you can do that, but nobody will ever submit a bid then?
Madam CAO?
I'm also going to, I think I'll make some general comments, but then I also might refer to Mr. St. Marseille. I believe that when we get into certain design specs in some of these facilities, if you want to build something like that into your tender, I'm not convinced that will help you on your number of proponents that might bid on the contract or the pricing, because I think typically much of that has a warranty or a specified period to be able to ascertain if there's problems within a fairly short period after the building is constructed, right? So I don't believe that your architects and designers and your constructors are going to warranty something, beyond,
What is a typical warranty on let's say, on a Benson Center, realistically?
I was going to say,
once we're done fixing it, good luck type of thing, or?
Generally, institutional commercial warranties are not very generous. They're not very generous whatsoever.
1 year? Did we even get 1 year?
Yeah, and I think too, if you did put something into, say, whether it be an RFP or a tender, and you put in a stipulation that had a requirement like that, you're probably going to pay a considerable premium. So it becomes a question of whether it's worth it or not, so.
Well, Your Worship, in light of the number of buildings that we've put up that seem to have glitches 2 and 3 and 4 years later, it may be worth us to consider ponying up on the premium, and
Yeah.
insurance is
Well-
not always
Yeah.
cheap, but
I'm a bundle of irritation right now.
yeah, like
Mr.
disaster, that's not an old building, and we're already starting to fix
No,
it.
I know. Mr. Saint-Marseille, do you have a comment?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't have a lot to add to that, but generally I would agree with the fact that 1 year is kind of the industry standard.
Okay.
And if we ask for more than that, that means that there's other parties carrying risks, so they have to build that into their cost provisions. I don't know if Mr. Fothrop, Michael has any comments as well. He's very close to a lot of tendering work as well, not on buildings, but infrastructure. and
I'll ask him.
I don't know if he has anything
Mr.
else.
Fothrop, the other Mr. Fothrop?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's correct. So most of our city tenders for work would be, you get a year warranty after commissioning or after everything is brought online and in service. Anything over and above that, we put in a tender, I think you're going to start paying for it, like everybody mentioned.
Madam CAO?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Notwithstanding, potentially this could be perceived as a bit of a design flaw, I think some of the other items that we've had to maintain and work on at the Benson Center. The Benson Center was planned just when I was coming into the city, and the success of that facility and the usage of that facility and the number of people that walk through the doors, I think has gone beyond. We hoped that it was going to be a very popular facility. We hoped that there might have been an opportunity for a lot of use and different age groups and different types of activities. And I believe that, and I'm going to look to Mr. Fothrop, I believe that it really has turned into quite a hub and a much busier facility than we originally thought, but what we had hoped that it would be well used as well.
No, I would completely agree. It is extremely well used, whether it be during the day by seniors or in the evenings by minor sports groups. And it's certainly, and in fairness to the designers, I mean, my children are very involved in minor sports, and I've seen most of the arenas in all Eastern Ontario, and really, I think this one here, I mean, I'm certainly biased, but it is the nicest one I've seen in all of Eastern Ontario. It's very generous in space, and the functional layout is just incredible. So it is a very well-used facility.
So,
in addition, of course, to the potential of soccer and football coming to that area, and of course, those activities are outdoors, but, showers, cafeteria, or the canteen, et cetera. It's just going to get busier.
You're all speaking to the converted.
Yeah.
We love the Benson Center. Some of us have our name on a plaque at the entrance, right, Councillor Grant?
That's right.
So we're very proud of it. Spoken like a true, good CAO. But politicians may be allowed some frustration around some of these glitches. That's all that is. The center is beloved, absolutely. All right, Councillor Bergeron.
It's a quick one. I have no problem with this funding request, but is this going to create a higher operating cost if you're dehumidifying a lot more air?
No, I expect it should lower the operating costs, because our dehumidifier won't have to run as long, because it'll be able to more efficiently pull the air out of that space and turn it over and pass it through the dehumidifier, where I think now that dehumidifier has to run much longer in order to achieve the same amount of effect.
Thank you. And quickly, can you touch on the actual effect on the user experience in the arena itself? We're talking better ice?
Really, the improvements will only be during these short periods of the seasons that are causing problems for us. So, I mean, we have canceled ice, or we're fortunate that we have the 3 pads, and quite often, if the issue predominantly it happens on pads 2 and 3, because it's one dehumidifier that's working to try and keep both. So if only one of those arenas has ice in it, that dehumidifier seems to keep up. It's once we put the second one in is when it struggles, but we've been fortunate enough, most times we've been able to put that user group onto one of the other pads because it's free. There have been a few occasions where we've had to cancel their booking. So this will help protect us that we don't have to do that, and people will be able to come and enjoy their activity as they expect to do.
We did have the same problem at the complex as well. Years gone by. You couldn't see in there at times.
A long time ago, yeah. There wasn't dehumidification in there.
Oh, boy. Next one. Thank you.
Page C59, upgrade outdoor pool filter systems. So this is a multi-year project which began in 2015 to improve our outdoor pool filters. So 2 have been upgraded to date, St. Joe's Park as well as Reg Campbell Park. And we propose then to proceed with, we have 3 other outdoor pools, and we'd like to continue the project and do Matisse Park, St. Francis Park, and Terry Fox Park. Next is page C60, which is the Art Center design. So as many of you probably already realize, we have purchased 159 Pitt Street for the purpose of converting it into an art center. Back in 2018, prior to the purchase of the building, we had commissioned a study of the building to determine the suitability of converting it to an art center, and they came up with some design concepts. Now that we've purchased the building, this $300,000, the intention is to retain the services of an architectural firm that would produce design and tender drawings to actually complete that construction. So this would not be the construction, this would just be the design component and getting it tender ready. As well, we would look to have them provide some sort of an estimate to provide, I guess, some sort of service or consulting service during construction. So to answer questions that may arise, or especially since it's a renovation of an existing building, you can count on coming into some unforeseen problems during construction. And so I think we would look to have them be part of that process in some capacity as a resource.
Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm glad to see this. This is here for a couple of reasons. We have a fundraising committee that would really like to be able to have something that we could sell people as far as sponsorships of rooms, theaters, whatever. So with this, would there come a 3D model that we could drop down on somebody's desk and say, hey, you want to own this part of the building?
Through you, Madam Mayor, possibly we could ask them to produce a 3D model if they're able to within the $300,000 budget. Right now, it's the intentions to, I guess, get that designed so that it can be tender ready.
Right.
But that's a possibility.
I think it would help. I mean, the fundraising efforts are going very well, but I think that would really help push it well beyond our goal.
Any other questions? Councillor Bergeron?
Is there a business plan in place for the Art Center?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, there isn't a business plan in place. I guess what's happened to date is the initial Art Center concept was recommended as part of a Culturescape study that was done years ago, which recommended an Arts and Culture Center. Then a feasibility study was completed by this group that did the fit test study for this site, which recommended the complex. And then when this building came for sale, a local group, I guess, approached the city, and so it happened very quickly, I guess, in that we evaluated the potential of the building to determine whether it could be suitable, and it purchased it. So, but no, I guess right now, as far as the long-term operations of it, it's still, we're still developing the idea. We have toured a number of facilities as well recently to try and get an understanding of how they operate, whether they're city-run or whether it's a third-party group that operates it. And so, I mean, I guess it's still developing as we speak.
So can I get some clarity on that? Is there a business plan coming?
Mr. Boileau?
Well, I'm not sure that we're actually thinking that we need to do a business plan. I think what we're looking at in this building is a fairly simple project. It's a black box, which in our many visits to, many places in Ottawa, Kingston, and abroad, it's a fairly basic, it's really a black box that's very practical for multiple use for a crowd of about 100 to 175 people. And there really isn't anything like that in this region. So, and again, we visited a number of places. It's surprising how much space you need for ancillary space to that black box. And so we're not looking at a very grand project. We're looking at a fairly simple one, which we believe is not being met in this community. Of course, there is Oldsville Theatre, which is 600 people and less, of course. But this is an animal that does not exist in this region.
I appreciate that.
And we're convinced of that, having been to other black boxes in the region.
One thing to add is that the feasibility study that VG Architects did, it did have some costing and revenue projections, as well as a projected cost or net cost to the city to operate. It was based on their recommendation at the complex. So that was not when we did the fit test for the site. Essentially, they didn't redo those figures and calculations. It was really just, they looked at the location and it came up with some concepts to try and determine whether or not the site could house some of the theater and some of the features that were earmarked for the complex location.
So, thank you. Still comes back to process for me, the same issue with the fire hall. I support the idea of a fire hall. I just want to know what we're talking about in terms of operating costs, in terms of the future. You say it's not a very grand plan, but I think it is, right? It's a $6 million project, give or take. Again, I'll go back to process. Has City Council approved an art center, or are we approved buying a building, we approved a feasibility study, now we're being asked to approve $300,000 in architecture costs? The business plan could be voted on and be a thing that we track forward. That's what I'm really interested in.
I don't know that the minutes would show it, but my understanding is the building was purchased to build an art center. And if there's any deviation from that, I'm not aware of it.
So I'd like to make a motion again that we wait on this financing until there's a business plan.
I second that, Your Worship.
So the motion is that we, Councillor Bergeron, defer?
Defer financing until the business plan is approved.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Hollingsworth. So debate on that motion. I had recognized Councillor Hollingsworth initially. Did you want to speak? You were next on the speaking list.
Well, as long as just a smidgen of leeway, one quick question to our finance, and then I'll speak on the motion and I'll get both. Like, I was going to ask about the financing. I'm not sure if it's germane to the motion that's on the table, but I think it is.
I'll give you some leeway.
I'll be quick about it. Your Worship, to Ms. Bailey, through you, before I speak to the motion, is there a reason why we chose to pony up this money vis-a-vis capital instead of the operating side? Like, why wouldn't we just, it's $300,000, why couldn't we just say, okay, $300,000 on the operating budget, because that's the real cost for something that's being done now. It's not like a building that we're gonna finance over 20 years or something like that. So is there, what criteria did we use?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's a very good question. Oftentimes, plans for capital construction, capital works, becomes part of the cost of the building, and it's depreciated over the life of the building.
Right.
So this would be the initial cost, like a
Okay.
phase one, just like what we do in John St. Mary's area.
Fair enough.
Same idea.
Okay, thank you. Now, with regards to the actual motion, Your Worship, personally, I'm not opposed or in favor of an arts center. I don't feel currently I have enough information to tell anybody on the street whether it's a good idea or not, in that I don't know who's going to operate it. Is it the city that's going to operate it? Is it an outside agency that's going to operate it? Are we going to, like, is it a board of directors? I don't know that. There's talk of, I assume, you can help me if I'm here, gentlemen, I assume there's a little theater kind of component, but at the time, at election time, there was this discussion, we were going to have all kinds of artsy type things going on, and I'm not really sure what it is that's actually going on. Is there going to be like a visual arts component, a culinary, is there a music, dance, like what do you, I don't have a problem opposed to an arts center, but I would like to kind of know for sure what it is I'm voting for, and currently, maybe I haven't worked hard enough at educating myself, but nobody's been able to give me a really clear answer to this point. That being said, a business plan gives me a clear idea to say we're doing this, and this, and this. This is how much approximate, and I realize that there's a little ballparking going on here. Approximate cost, approximate operating, here's how we're gonna run it. Let's go. Okay, there's $4 million, build it and have at her. Sounds perfectly fine to me. But right now, I just feel like I'm kind of groping in the dark a little bit. So I'd just like a little more information perhaps about the actual operation of the facility.
I have Councillor Lane and Councillor Mack on the list.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess I won't presume to have the answers, but I do want to say this. We get the same questions when we're out asking people for money, because they want to know things that we don't know yet, and that we're only going to find out when we finish, when the architects take their year to finish the studies they're going to do, for example, a functional assessment to see what the building will hold. This is a first step, and it's a step to starting the year where during that year, all those questions will be answered. But unless we take this step, we'll always guess. And I know Mr. Barlow said we toured a lot of art centers. We did, and we found a lot of different models, for example, for the governance and for who's going to run it. We can't decide that until we know a little bit more about what the building is going to hold and about what the community wants and what the building can actually handle. And unfortunately, you can't make those decisions without doing the studies that will give you the information on which you can base those decisions. So we either stop and, I don't know, just stop, period. Or we take this first step, which is only the first step, but this is a year-long first step that we have to take if we're ever going to find those answers. And so I know I'm personally convinced from my interaction with the community, and my gosh, I guess this process of wanting an arts facility really came into its own in about 2012 with the release of the Culturescape report, when it outlined the fact that we need this. Like, our community is very rich in athletic opportunities. We've got all sorts of wonderful things for our community, but we're somewhat lacking in the arts and culture front. And so, having been that pointed out to us, this is, my gosh, that was in 2012, and this is 2019. We're only now at this first really serious step. And I certainly urge my colleagues to take this first step. Otherwise, we're going to be stalled again for maybe another 10 years. There are people who've worked my gosh, so much longer than I have even on having an art center for the city. And I think it's time we do it. But sadly, this isn't just a case of not doing it until we know the answers. This step is the way to get the answers. So that's all I can say by way of urging my colleagues to support this now, because we're in the dark, and it's going to cost us $300,000 to put the lights on so we can see the answers. So that's what I would suggest as being the reason why people should support this.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. Councillor Mack?
Well, we're in this position because this came up real fast. We were moving to the civic complex. We'd be probably not even there yet. And the opportunity came to buy this building up, and thanks to Maureen contacting an individual who had great contacts with BMO, they decided to take it off the market for a couple of weeks so we could make an offer, and they accepted our offer, and we own the building. And, well, I voted to buy the building for an arts center. I think everybody that voted for that. That's the idea. There was never any, we're going to buy the building and decide what we're going to do with it. We bought it for an arts center. So when we talk about a business plan, I am hoping to get this budget wrapped up by Saturday morning. If we're going to put a business plan together in 3 days, I don't want to look at it because that's going to be just a rush job. So I think, we're moving ahead with it, and I concur with what Elaine just said. I've wondered too about the governance, how we're going to operate it, but we can work that out. The idea is, we got the building, we're moving ahead with it. Simple as that.
Thank you, Councillor Mack. Councillor Towndale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd agree with my colleagues, Councillor McDonald, Councillor McIntosh. The way, it came up pretty fast, and this was an opportunity we couldn't pass up. Quite frankly, at a fraction of the cost of the proposed location at the complex. The other thing too is, from our perspective, last term, we had reports that contained some of this information because there was the, what was it called again? The
Fit test?
There was the fit test, but prior to that, what?
Feasibility study?
Feasibility study, thank you.
Right.
Couldn't think of it, I guess, the day here, it's been a 12-hour day for me.
Yeah.
And, we had the feasibility study, went out for a proposal, came back, the consultant came and presented it to us, and it contained things like the operational cost was mentioned, it could, what it would look like. Of course, this was for a different facility, a different size and whatnot, but it gave us an idea. And I think that's why maybe those of us who were here last term feel like we have those answers, because we saw some of this information that would have been contained in a business plan. Like I understand where you're coming from, Councillor Bergeron, because the business that I'm in, that you're familiar with, saw the business plan before I got into it. That's a big deal. But at the same time, while this is happening in the background, the community group is fundraising. Plus, the goal here is to get monies, hopefully, from the federal and provincial governments. And part of that is contingent on the project being shovel-ready. And in order for it to be shovel-ready, we need to complete these studies. Otherwise, we won't get any funding for it. And when they get pushed back, it delays that potential funding. So even if the community comes, they come forward and they have their $1 million, the city is like, okay, we have $1 million that we can allocate. Now we're waiting on the provincial and federal governments. If we don't have all our ducks in a row, they're going to keep denying it and denying it and denying it, and nothing's going to get done. And then we're sitting with an empty building longer than we should. So that's why I think it's important to get this passed now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Towndale. Councillor Caroline Hébert.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think a business plan is a great idea. However, we don't know the business yet. I think that's where Councillor McDonald made the point where this is going to give us the answers. We have a great space. We have an idea of what we want in it, but this report will tell us exactly what we can put in there, and then we'll be able to say, all right, so we've got the Black Box Theater, potentially a small gallery space, this, that, and the other thing, and then once we have this structure put together, then we can see what's the best way of running said business, and get to that then. But I think this is step one. I think if you're creating a business, if you want to open a business, you kind of have the idea first. We have a concept, but the idea is really going to come through the public consultation, which we have done a lot of, but now it's a different space, so there'll be more of that with this, I would hope. And then we could put together that operational plan and how we go about that. But like Councillor Tandell mentioned, we do have some of this information in the feasibility study that was done for the complex. Yes, it's a bit different now, but we have a bit of that background work, and this would certainly stall it. And I think that jumping on this space just it feels like a few months ago really let us leap ahead, because I think the concept with the civic complex was putting us, years away from this, but this is making it a reality, and a reality within, the next few years. So I absolutely I'm going to not support the motion to defer this. I would support a business plan eventually, of course. I think we all would, but I think this is step one, and then business plan next. Might be a little reverse from other ways of doing it, but this is how we'll have to do it this time.
Councillor Glenn Grant, then Todd Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to talk about the Benson Center. What we envisioned when we first started the Benson Center looks nothing like what we have now. We had a restaurant in there, a number of other things, and then all of a sudden there was a field house, and there was a tennis court, and there was rooms for meetings, etc. So I think this is a basic design that can, and it's only going to be on paper, it's not going to be built. So if you can manipulate anything that's in here, and then when you decide on the final version, then your business plan will come together from there. So I know I had the same questions as Councillor Bergeron had when we first started. I said, where's your business plan? You need a business plan, you need a business plan. Well, this is to look at, say, what do we conceptually see happening here, and then we can get to the next step after that and start putting a business plan together with that. It'll probably look entirely different than what you have here when you end up finalizing it. So I want support. I think this is to start, a good start.
Councillor Todd Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The feasibility study told us already who's going to use it, the groups that want to use it. It gave us 2 or 3 different options of how to run it. It also identified, as the slogan goes for the fundraising campaign, it's be the link. There are things we've missed out on in this community that didn't come here because we had a missing link, which was a strong centered arts and culture sector. So higher education passed us by. There are some businesses that have probably looked at different places, because when you're building something for somebody to come and work, and it's great that there's a place for their kids to play hockey and baseball and soccer, but where's the space for their kid to dance and act and sing? So all those things were addressed already. Yes, it was done for something to be built attached to the civic complex. So this is scaled back in size, but we already know what groups want to use it. That's been clearly identified. So let's get this done, and then we can take the information we already have from the feasibility study to, as Glenn said, massage this a little bit to make it what it's going to look like for real. And then we can decide from there, as long as this takes up to a year, as Councillor McDonald mentioned. That's a lot of time to come up with a business plan once you know exactly what's going to be in there and how that's going to look. I don't think you can do a business plan until this step is complete, so that we can tie all the loose ends together that the feasibility study kind of gave us all these things, and this is going to tie them all together. So a business plan I agree with. It's not, you can't do one right now until this is complete.
Councillor Sid Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've been involved in trying to get this done for probably 21 years. One of the things that we have to understand is sometimes things come up that have to be jumped on right away. This was one of them, because that building became available. We jumped on it right away, or it would have been sold to somebody else. And it would have cost us $12 million to build a plan like this, where the consultants came in and told us that's what we should do. Well, we did the same thing with Allsville Theater. We jumped on it when the province said we were cutting $3 million from our budget, that theater's gone. We had to jump on that. We had no idea how we were going to run it, but we jumped on the idea that we need to form a committee that's going to run this theater, that's going to help renovate, do it now. We had no idea where we were going. That theater is very successful today. We've put over $750,000 in that theater. It's a valuable piece of Cornwall. When I look at a small box theater, there are a few things that can happen there, like conferences, small conferences. The affordability of 680 seat theater, and under the laws that we work, is not affordable for small groups of 125 or 130. So both of them are needed in this city. I'm going to support this. I won't support the deferral. We need to go ahead with this. We have $140,000 raised in no time at all, so.
Actually, you're.
That's at the last.
209.
209.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, the last time I was around to see it. So, you know, in what,
Get your
2.5 months, 3 months, 209. Now we can do like we did with the aquatic center and say, look, we're serious, we raised the money for this.
Thank you,
That's how
Councillor.
we got the money from the province and the feds.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Councillor DePel?
No, I'm good.
Thank you.
Well, no, I have to speak yet.
Oh. Okay, boss.
So there's an expression in French. I love that expression. C'est pas d'hier. Like, we have been talking about this for years, right, Councillor Gardner? So I understand, though, the motion. I get it. Because we're not all on the same page. This is a new council. As Councillor Towndale said, we've had the benefit, some of us have had the benefit of some of that history. So maybe what we've not done well, and I'm going to look to administration, look back at ourselves as a council, we haven't packaged this right. You know what I mean? I know, Councillor Elaine, and the group, you're out there, you're fundraising, but we need to sort of put down in one place all the timelines, all the things that have happened to lead us to where we are now. We need some context. The newer councillors need some context. The councillors that are coming back on council need some context. And I feel very close to it. I go to the art walks, I go to theater, I'm a artsy all the way. But we need to be on the same page with the same context. And so I think we need to work on that. Going to Councillor Bennett's point, I do think that we need something concrete to show to people. You know, we did with the Benson Center. There was something that was tangible that people could see to catch the vision. So this is about helping everybody catch that vision and bring us forward. But c'est pas d'hier. It's been a long time coming. We are a mature and sophisticated community here. That's what Cornwall is now. And the fact that we don't have an art center is a glaring lack. Doesn't fit who we are. Yes, we are sophisticated, and it doesn't fit who we are anymore not to have an art center. But we do need to come together to package it. I know that you've had visits. A group has gone away to get, and you are all on this vision. We don't know that yet. We haven't heard about those visits yet. So I think we need to work on that. Does anybody want a recorded vote?
Yes, but could I speak to the motion before?
You can close it off.
So
You
I
made
just
the
want to
motion.
make two really clear points. I'm not opposed to an art center. That seems to be the general tone coming out. I'm opposed to it without a business plan. There's a really, really big difference. So I get all, I've read the fit test. I've gone through that. I'm opposed to process here, again.
Shall I go to the recorded vote? Well, did anybody ask for, because I can't apparently ask for a recorded vote.
I would ask for it.
Thank you, Councillor Bergeron.
Can we clarify what the motion is?
The motion is to defer the art center, the art design until business plan is approved. I'll go around the table. Councillors Claude McIntosh?
Against.
Elaine McDonald?
Against.
Sid Gardner?
Against.
Dean Hollingsworth?
I'm in favor.
Caroline Hébert?
Contre.
Councillors Maurice Dupel?
Against.
Glenn Grant?
Against.
Todd Bennett?
Against.
Justin Towndale?
No.
Éric Bergeron?
In favor.
And Madam Mayor?
Against.
That is defeating, Madam
Motion
Mayor.
is defeated. So, I want to thank everybody for this long day. It's been good. Thank you, council, and thank you, administration. And we're back here tomorrow at 2:30, so I need a motion to adjourn, please.
Sorry.
Madam Clerk, can you just pick two people?
Darn, I was right there.
Thank you, à demain.
You guys should have put that on your last part, your last page.
That's all right.